and I enjoy the quiet nights. It's kind of nice. We are live. You're sounding great. It's
Cool,
awesome.
cool.
You can hear. Let's see. You should be able to hear this, right? Nope, not that one. How about?
That is like drinking sweaty butter.
Okay. I moved some
Great testing.
files. I moved some files around, and so some of my Stream Deck buttons no longer have a thing to play
That's cool.
because I go through periodically and take old episodes and move them onto a NAS so I don't use up all my hard drive space. And then I forget that I do that, and I go to play a button. I'm like, it's not working.
Ah,
But all right, cool. Well, I don't see any reason to beat around the bush. We can just jump right into it.
yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Cool, cool, cool. I did Diamond Club Streamathon yesterday. I did a couple of hours playing Return to Monkey Island.
Okay, nice.
I don't know if you ever played any of the Monkey Island games.
The island. Those are LucasArts,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I played like Day of the Tentacle, like all the other ones except for Grim Fandango. So yeah, Day of the Tentacle, Sam Max, Full
Yep.
Throttle. I actually just downloaded and replayed a bunch of them.
Yeah, I've been going through and doing that. So Monkey Island was because it was Ron Gilbert that did Maniac Mansion.
Mm.
And then he did Secret of Monkey Island and Monkey Island 2 before he left LucasArts.
Okay.
And but his fingerprints were over a bunch of stuff. Well, he ended up going off and doing Double Fine and doing his own thing for a while, but he came back to do the Return to Monkey Island, and it brand new this year.
Yeah,
Bringing
yeah, I heard.
and it's
Yeah.
really good so far. It's got that same type of humor, and it even like I love it because the opening to the game spoofs and pokes fun at the ending to Monkey Island 2 and the way that it
Mm.
ended. And it's just perfect. Like it's such a Ron Gilbert style thing to do. And if you ever get a chance, if you like that style game and you haven't played Thimbleweed Park yet, pick that up.
Okay. Oh,
It's
okay.
on
And then
it's
is it
on
on
like
Steam?
any platform. Steam has it. I think it's $20. And it's Ron Gilbert's game he did a couple of years ago. He did a Kickstarter for it, and it's awesome. It's that exact old style,
Nice.
and I love every second of it. Cool. Alrighty. Well, yes, but actually no. Um, all right, I'm gonna get us started here. So we are. Where's my button? Nerd. Yes, I am a nerd. I am a nerd, Amy. You know this, and I'm proud of it. Damn it. We are gonna get started in three, two, one.
Listen to this. Expect this stagnation to continue until the Department of Agriculture's January crop report. Exactly as we thought, Randolph.
Wrong. Quite wrong. Untrue. They've given this genetics fellow the Nobel Prize. A man doesn't know the first thing about human nature.
Randolph, we're about to make millions of dollars in frozen orange juice, and you're talking to me about human nature.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies and specifically talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 199, and our movie this week is 1983's Trading Places, starring Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. And joining me to talk about it, he'd never seen it before, Tyler Cardwell. Tyler, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on and then introducing me to this movie because I it's one of those movies I think like maybe seen it or something that I've been like, oh yeah, I need to check out this old Dan Aykroyd Eddie Murphy movie. So thank you for making me watch this.
Absolutely. So that is kind of your history with it. Is you like when did you know about it existing at all? Because you're right around the same age that I am, maybe a couple years younger. So
I mean, I'll venture out and say I'll be 36 in at the end of this month.
okay,
So yeah, I mean, yeah, like I think, like I said, like just random clips of stuff, yeah, like playing Seen It or something, and it
okay,
would show a clip of the movie, and I'd be like, oh, okay, that's a movie from the '80s. I should go check that out, and I just never did.
Right.
And so yeah, until you kind of pointed out to me when we were trying to pick out these movies, it's like, oh yeah, let's do that. That looked good.
Yeah. So this is a movie I saw when I was younger, and I've seen quite a few times now. And it always sort of, it's a movie that I will be reminded of. I quote every once in a while. There's a few quotes, and I captured a good bunch of stuff we'll play later and kind of talk about. But this was a movie that came out in 1983. It's directed by John Landis, and it's starring Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. And it's interesting to me because this is an R-rated comedy film that was number 4 at the box office for 1983. It had a roughly, I think, like $15 million production budget, made just under $100 million, made about $90 million, which today doesn't sound like a whole lot, and there's a ton of movies that make more than that in their opening day, but in 1983, that was number 4 overall for the year, behind like, I think it was Return of the Jedi was number 1 that year.
That's the small indie film, Return of the Jedi.
This little film you might have heard of. But not only is it a comedy, it's an R-rated comedy, and it was number 4 at the box office. And I kind of tried to look at when the last time an R-rated straight comedy film was even anywhere near the top 10 in the box office. And it's been a decade or two since anything has come close to that. Like, this was just a different time in film. But I love the story of kind of this getting made because John Landis, who is a director that I've covered a few different times on this show, and other shows that I've done, he was a director who really like hit a stride in the early 80s through like 88, 89, where listen to some of these that he made. So after doing the Kentucky Fried Movie, he makes National Lampoon's Animal House. And then he does The Blues Brothers, An American Werewolf in London, followed by this movie. He's part of the Twilight Zone movie. He directs Michael Jackson's Thriller. Then he does Spies Like Us, Three Amigos, Coming to America. And then it's sort of, after that it gets kind of middling. Oscar was a movie he did with Stallone. Beverly Hills Cop 3, which is, most people say, is the worst of the 3 Beverly Hills Cop movies. Actually, not most people. Pretty much everyone does. And he kind of floated around doing some things here and there, but that stretch in the 80s was just like hit after hit, and he was doing these R-rated comedies, or like PG-13 and edgier comedies that were really interesting. Plus, he was a horror guy. I mean, American Werewolf in London is a classic horror, but it's got that comedy element to it. He always had this kind of silliness to his movies. He really enjoys. Landis is a student of Hollywood. And so for him, like, to do some of this stuff was kind of doing like old screwball type comedies from the 40s. And he would get these actors, and he did it in this movie, get actors from old Hollywood and bring them back in. And I love that. But this script got written, and it was originally, they wanted to make it with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. And they had done, was it Silver Streak? They had done, and See No Evil, Hear No Evil. And so you can kind of tell, right? Like, you can kind of see it.
Yeah.
And Pryor, I don't remember if this was around when he injured himself freebasing cocaine or not, or if there was something else. He couldn't do it. So then they wanted to bring in, the studio wanted to bring in Eddie Murphy. And he was not a complete unknown, but he was not a movie star yet. He wasn't Eddie Murphy. He had done Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And he had finished 48 Hours, but it hadn't released yet. They had just had preview releases. But the studio wanted him. And I love, there was a making of documentary I watched on Trading Places where Landis says, so the studio came to me and said, what do you think of Eddie Murphy? And he's like, who? Like, he had no idea who he was at that point. And then they went on to work together on Coming to America, which is a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen that, it's so good. So Eddie Murphy didn't want to work with Gene Wilder because the way he put it was he didn't want to just like be typecast or have it look like he was just replacing Richard Pryor.
Yeah, I could see that.
and then Wilder didn't, ends up not being in it. And John Landis wanted Dan Aykroyd. Well, Aykroyd was still young in his career, but he had been around for about 10 years almost, doing TV stuff and movies, but never, he had carried one movie to this point in his career, and that was, it come out the year before, it was called Dr. Detroit, and it bombed. But he had worked with Landis on the Blues Brothers a couple years earlier, so they had a good relationship. But Aykroyd was kind of thought of as like a package deal with John Belushi, and then John Belushi had died in 1982. Mm-hmm. But I'm really glad that Landis kind of stuck his neck out and said, no, let's get Aykroyd in here, because he is the perfect foil to Eddie Murphy in this, and like the perfect kind of balance point, because Aykroyd has this ability to be both the stiff, straight-laced guy and really kooky and zany and he's like, I don't know how he does that, and he can do both. It's sort of, Steve Martin is really good at that too, right?
Right.
Like some guys just have that ability, and so to pair those two together was perfect. Especially at the beginning of their careers like this, or towards the beginning, and they were great. And then to have them play off of our two sort of villains in the Duke brothers, was it Don Ameche and Richard Bellamy, and they are the old school Hollywood, and I love them in this so much, the Dukes. Now, have you seen Coming to America?
I have not, and that's I should probably check that out. That's another one of my. Maybe you could have me back later on to do when you circle around to that if you haven't already.
Yeah, I definitely would do that. I have no problem exposing you to all of John Landis's 80s comedies, because Spies Like Us is another favorite of mine. That's Aykroyd and Chevy Chase. Okay, so you've seen that one.
Yeah, it's been a while though.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to check that one out again.
So Coming to America does have a scene that involves the Duke brothers in an uncredited scene where they're playing like homeless people because they've lost all their money.
And it is them playing the same characters?
Yes. Yeah, they're uncredited and they don't name them, but it's Richard Bellamy and Don Ameche dressed as homeless guys. And I think Prince Akeem like gives them some money while they're on the street. It's pretty funny.
And that takes place after this film, so without.
Yeah, it's not spoiling anything.
They're down on their luck and everything. That's kind of a cool little cameo.
Yeah. And like Landis was really good at that. Landis was always good at having these little silly moments, because again, he loved that kind of old Hollywood stuff. And this movie very much feels like it would have been one of those screwball comedies from like the 30s or 40s. It has those elements to it. It's very much a Prince and the Pauper kind of retelling. I love. Go ahead.
Have you seen Dirty Work? Late 90s.
I have. It's been a while.
It kind of reminded me of that, where Dirty Work, they bring in a lot of like older actors and comedians, and so there's kind of that like, hey, here's the reference to the old school guys, and still doing kind of slapstick, kind of silly stuff. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of that a lot.
Yeah, and I love having, so you have comedians like Eddie Murphy, and you have and Dan Aykroyd is a very comedic actor as well, but in a different style. And then to bring in like Richard Bellamy and Don Ameche are not thought of as comedic actors, but they have, especially Ameche had really great comedic timing and delivery in this. And there's a story. So we're going to be jumping around a lot because it's just like the plot of this movie is very basic. The Duke brothers are these multimillionaires that run basically, they do margin trading of commodities, and they decide to have a bet between themselves over nature versus nurture, because the Randolph Duke, Richard Bellamy, is very much into this thing, and his brother Mortimer is played by Don Ameche. He's like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's all nature. It's breeding. It's stock. And so they have a bet between themselves if they can take the guy who runs their firm, Lewis Winthorpe III, and strip him of his money and everything, and can they turn him to crime and take this guy who's been in housing projects and grow up with no money and put him in the penthouse, and can they can he successfully run the company? There's your story. But there's something about just like the way that that everything goes about in this movie that's just, it's silly, and you do have to suspend some disbelief of like how they could get away with some of this stuff, but at the same time you sort of can see it working because like there is very much a difference between the classes. Yeah. And with enough money you can get away with a lot. And it's one of those comedy elements that I don't think happens enough in Hollywood films, poking fun like that. Especially poking fun at, the rich and making them out to be just because the Duke brothers are terrible. They're just terrible people, like to their core. They're racist, classist, and they don't really have that many redeeming qualities other than their money. So when they lose all of that, you don't feel bad for them at all.
Right.
But even like
that was one thing I was really kind of surprised about, how much social commentary, about classism and racism, that was really, it wasn't just referencing or making a part of. It was like really like, no, it was taking a kind of drawing a line between the different things. So I was just kind of surprised. Oh, this isn't just a comedy. This is it has a couple different messages in there.
And I think that's, for me, that's what makes me remember it, is like the comedy is really good, but there's that undertone where it's not preachy about it either. Like there isn't a moment where any one character, calls somebody out and has like a speech or anything. It's just, it's underlying everything. And so you just see it the whole time. But I was going to say about Don Ameche. So Don Ameche hadn't acted in film in about 13 years when this came out. He'd been doing stage plays and things like that. But Landis wanted him to come into it because what he wanted was these old style Hollywood actors who had never played villains, who'd never been bad guys. Yeah. And he's like, well, Don Ameche hadn't been, so he brings him in. And there's a great story he tells about when he's talking to him about casting him. And there's that scene at the end when they're on the commodities floor where Randolph has the heart attack and like collapses on the floor. And the guy says, what about your brother? And Don Ameche's character has to say, F him. And, he keeps yelling. And Don Ameche didn't want to say it because he's like, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with, the profanity. And what's great is Landis. This is such a Landis thing. And this is straight from an interview I watched with him. He said, so I looked at him and I said, well, Don, it's really important to the script and it's important to the character that he says that in that moment. And so like, I can understand if you can't do it, but if that's so, I can't hire you. And basically Don Ameche's like, okay, I'll try. And so they go to do it that day on the set. And he was like, I'll do it once. I will do the take one time. So he gets everybody to be quiet so he can do that take. And he does it the one time and then won't swear again. Meanwhile, every time after that, Landis was like, so every take afterwards, I would look at him and just say, don't F this up, Ameche. And just rib him for it. And like stories like that are great. This was apparently a very fun movie for people to make. Landis had a good time. Aykroyd's talked well about it. There was an interview with Eddie Murphy where he said he hasn't had fun on a movie set since Trading Places. He's like, since then it's been work. But because he was so new to it. It was such a new thing for him.
Interesting.
And I think it helped too that like being new, working with somebody like Aykroyd who had a Saturday Night Live background. So they could run that kind of stuff the same way. Jamie Lee Curtis was not new by any stretch, but she wasn't she was thought of as just a scream queen.
Like, Halloween.
Yeah. So she had done Halloween, The Fog, Prom Night, Terror Train. So Landis also had to fight for her to be in the movie because the studio didn't think she was bankable, that she could be funny. They thought she was only a horror actress. And she's hilarious. She has such good timing. I think the only thing with her is her character. Her performance is good, but the character is like straight out of a 1930s movie, sort of male fantasy type thing. Yeah. Like it's not really a character that would exist.
the prostitute with the heart of gold, or
Yeah.
I because I kind of I when they introduce her, she's like, oh yeah, I've got my brain. One of she was naming off her attributes, and she said her brain. I was like, oh okay, that might be kind of interesting. That interesting idea to explore in the movie, and they don't. Other than her just kind of going along with what the guys are doing and being part of the plan towards the end of the movie, she doesn't. It's not like she outsmarts anybody.
No.
In the She just has a plan for her career. Oh, I'll be doing this for another three. I think she has like 5 years, and
Something like
then
that.
she'll get out and she can retire. Like other than that, that was the extent of her, brainiac
Yeah,
skills.
I feel like it was definitely a character written by guys. And I think if you were to, and I don't think this is a movie you want to remake. Like there are movies that can stand a remake, but I think a comedy is such a hard thing to remake because how do you recapture that kind of lightning in a bottle, the moment? But if you were going to do that, her character I think would be fleshed out more and have more depth. And that's, I mean, look, Jamie Lee Curtis is great. I just wish that she had had more on the page to kind of go with, because you're right. They mention that, and then it's sort of like, okay, we're just gonna go with her being smart, but we don't see any evidence of that.
And I
and
didn't really understand how the appeal. Like, why is she taking in Dan Aykroyd?
yeah,
Oh, this, food costs money, housing costs money, yeah, but so you have to work for it, and then he doesn't really do much. He just keeps getting drunk and going off and doing things on his own. So
yeah.
yeah, it's just like
I think I had a note to myself like the romance is kind of there, but doesn't really, like, where did it come from? She takes pity on him when they're leaving the jail because she thought it was. She sort of was led to believe it would be like a joke, but then he seemed really upset, and so she takes pity on him. But then they just sort of become an item, and we miss the journey from A to B. We just jumped right to part D. So
yeah.
but that is what it is. It's funny because this is an almost 2 hour long comedy too. It's an hour and 56 minutes, and yet I do feel like there are moments where things are missing, like the scene where Winthorpe goes to the Christmas party dressed as Santa. I feel like we missed the scene or two before that where he decides to go and gets the Santa suit. He just sort of is there and already dirty.
Yeah, it would have. Yeah, if they had just maybe had a scene where Jamie Lee Curtis is like, "Okay, look, I'll hook you up with my friend. He's one of the Santa guys, and maybe even it's part of a con thing where it's for it says it's for the sign says it's for a charity, but it just goes into their pockets or whatever.
Yeah,
Like something like that. Then and then he sees the party happening and he goes, "Oh, I know how to get in." And just something like that would have been great.
although I will say. Yeah, but I will say that those scenes with him in the Santa suit are hilarious.
Yes.
Especially the moment where he's riding the bus, because you see him at the buffet table and he's just shoving stuff in his pockets. And you have the whole scene where he goes into Valentine's office, plants the drugs on him, pulls the gun, but first he pulls the piece of prime rib, and then's like, But when he leaves and he gets onto the bus and he's drunk and he just pulls, and then you forget by that point that he had stuffed an entire salmon fillet into his suit. So and Aykroyd even said, like, acting that was kind of not that hard because it's like, well, you've got salmon and you've got a beard and let's just combine the two. And so he's just eating salmon through his beard. It's ridiculous and gross, but like it's perfect for that moment because Winthorpe is just so down. I really have fun with this movie because the comedy is, for the most part, I will say that the comedy is pretty timeless. There is one bit towards the end that probably wouldn't get done today. However, I understand where they were going with it. But like the jokes in it, you get a lot of you can tell there's a lot of improv done.
Yeah.
And it does make you wonder, like, how many takes did they have to do for some of these? Because Eddie Murphy probably just went off on stuff, and it's a lot of fun. What was the one that made me think of the leg reveal, where Billy Ray Valentine, and he's pushing himself along in his little cart, and the cops start bothering him, and he's telling him how he was a Vietnam veteran, which that right there is where you can see some of that, like, oh, it was supposed to be Richard Pryor, because Eddie Murphy is definitely probably too young to have been in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But it makes the joke funnier because it makes it more ridiculous that he's trying to get away with that. And then they pick him up, and his legs, he just lets his legs touch the ground, and suddenly it's, I can see, and I've got legs. And it's like, how many takes did they do of that? Because I would have been just breaking character the whole time laughing. Because it's just so good. And then, like, the stuff in the jail cell with him, too. Because all that was improv.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
By the way, okay, so I've mentioned some of the main cast, but did you see some of the cameos?
So the big one that I wanted to point out was Frank Oz.
Yep.
Because I always love a good Frank Oz. I saw his name in the credits, so I kind of knew he was coming. But I thought it was hilarious that Frank Oz is the person who's doing the inventory for what's in Dan Aykroyd's pockets.
Yep.
Which a few years prior, Frank Oz was the cop who was in Blues Brothers, who was giving Elroy Blues the inventory of what was in his pocket. So it's like they're flip flopped, but he's taking away and giving away, the inventory of what's in his pockets.
Yeah,
I thought that was a good little nod to Blues Brothers. Yeah, and makes sense. Same director, same actor, and all that.
Love
stuff.
that.
So I
yeah.
thought that was
Landis liked to have Frank Oz pop up in his movies. He pops up in Spies Like Us. If you remember that, he's the guy giving the test that the two of them are taking. It's early in the movie, but the Aykroyd and Chase have to take that test, and he's the proctor.
Yeah, and the eye patch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I love seeing Frank Oz in anything, and I love the mirroring of him being the cop here. In the jail cell, there was a cameo. A blink and you miss it, and it's tough it would be a tough one to tell because he's so young, but it's a very young Giancarlo Esposito, aka Gus Fring.
That's
is
hilarious.
what he's most known for, but he was also in The Mandalorian. He had a small part in The Usual Suspects. Like, he's been around, but that's him leaning up against the bars when Eddie Murphy's talking about being a karate guy, kung fu guy. And he's so young. He's got just a little bit of a Jerry curl going on. Another one was Jim Belushi has a small part. And I thought that was kind of cool. Also, Arlene Sorkin, who would go on to most famously be the original voice of Harley Quinn in the Batman the Animated Series, but she also did work in soaps and a bunch of other stuff. She is at the very end of Billy Ray's party when everybody's leaving. She's the last one to kind of put her coat on. She's the blonde woman that puts the coat on and walks away. That's Arlene Sorkin. It was her first film role. Was this silent role for this. So it's like just random stuff. Because they shot in Philadelphia and New York. So that you can get a lot of extras and actors that way. But yeah, there's so many like moments in this that are just they're classic kind of John Landis style comedy. Like the beginning of the movie with the Dukes is one of those where there's that kind of visual storytelling and sort of movie shorthand where these guys are just jerks and you know it because they don't acknowledge anyone that's working for them at all.
Mr. Duke. Hello, Mr. Duke. Hello. Yeah.
And they don't even look at him. And you got like the procession, where the whole house staff is lining the walkway from the door to the car. Like they have to do that every single morning.
Every day. Yeah.
Oh God. And they don't even say a word. They just walk right past them like they're not even there, because to those two guys, those people just don't exist. And then you've got Coleman, who's Winthorpe's butler, played by Denham Elliott. And he's another one that he's not known for being a comedic actor, but he's got such a great dry humor to him, and he's perfect to put in a movie like this, because you need some, like, not everybody can be Eddie Murphy and be over the top. If you have more than him, it becomes too much. And so to have Denham Elliott, who, you know, most people would recognize as Marcus Brody from Indiana Jones, and here he is playing this butler, and I love him in this.
Yeah, that was one of the ones I was like, oh, that's the guy from Indiana Jones, and because I think that's the only other thing I've seen him in.
Probably.
But yeah, just his comedic timing and everything was really I thought was really good, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess he is kind of funny in Indiana Jones, like he's kind of a comedic character, but they really let him go. You know, he really got to show his comedic chops on this one. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, because Marcus Brody is a fun character for him, because Marcus is like just kind of clueless and sort of, he doesn't really, and like this character of Coleman knows what's going on all the time. And like my favorite moment with him is when they cut from the bar back to the house with Billy Ray, and he brings all the people back to the house, because the first shot is Coleman, and he's got the tray with all the drinks on it, and he kind of looks around and then just downs half that drink, like whatever's left in there, like, I might as well, everyone else is drinking. And there's just something about like his look of like, oh, I might get caught, I'm doing something illicit, and I love that. Or even the simple thing where he's making the crepe Suzette tableside,
This out,
and just turns around and throws it right away, like, oh, thank you, sir.
Oh yeah, you could have dessert yourself. And oh well, thank you, sir, and then just cut to the trash can.
Even like all the stuff with the house staff things where they give him his Christmas bonus, and it's a $5 bill.
Oh, it's from both of us.
Yeah,
half of that's from me.
Yep. Or what was the other good interaction is, so Winthorpe is an interesting character to me, because he doesn't change from the beginning of the movie to the end, but he has an arc.
Yeah, he changes the lead.
Yeah, it's weird how he can have a story arc, but he doesn't really go through any kind of a transformation. He's the same a-hole at the beginning of the movie as he is at the end of the movie. It's just that, you're right, you put it perfectly, he changes allegiances. He just shifts his view from looking down on everybody to looking down on the people that are just like rude to other people, basically. And I found that interesting, because I never really, until I was watching it this time, kind of, because I've seen it plenty of times, but this time I'm really watching it more analytically, and I never really thought about it like that. But he's just the same dude all the way through the movie. He does have the one moment that you definitely wouldn't get away with doing today, and that's him coming into the train car in blackface as the Rastafarian.
Well, that for Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah,
Sorry,
for Dan Aykroyd.
Winthorpe. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Louis Winthorpe. Yeah. But Dan Aykroyd coming in blackface as a Rastafarian, you couldn't get away with doing that today. And I mean, really, probably shouldn't have got away with it back then. However, it was a moment as I was watching it, and I'd forgotten about it, and so I was like, ooh, I'm not. Yeah, really, they did that. And then I started thinking about it, and yes, it's terrible. But it also kind of makes sense that Louis Winthorpe would think that's okay. Like, that character would think there's nothing wrong with doing that. And in that sense, I understand it. Like, it's still kind of one of those, it's with the benefit of hindsight, I'm pretty sure Dan Aykroyd and John Landis would be like, all right. I mean, it was...
They would probably change that.
Yeah, it was the 80s, and it wasn't as openly taboo, but we shouldn't do that kind of thing. But I sort of understood it from the aspect of like, no, Winthorpe is a guy that's so out of touch with something like that he would think that's okay, and they go with that.
I feel like Billy Ray Valentine would be like, oh, this guy's an idiot. I'm gonna let him do it. Like,
yeah,
that's a bad idea. I'm gonna let him do it because
Yeah,
it's not going to
that-
cause the plan to fail. Probably. Well, it did, but yeah, he's like, oh, I'll let him embarrass himself. Somebody else will beat him up or something.
Oh yeah, that's totally a Billy Ray Valentine
Yeah,
type of
yeah.
thing. As he's dressed as the Cameroonian prince or whatever, or student. And the that scene also had the Inga from Sweden was not how it was written in the script. It was actually written that she was supposed to be Austrian. But Jamie Lee Curtis is like, I can't do accents well. And Landis is like, well, what can you do? And she goes, Swedish? And he's like, fine, you're Swedish. Just go with that. And so they worked that into the movie, which I think, again, makes for a funnier joke.
Oh yeah, because they have that joke. It was like, oh, well, oh, you're wearing lederhosen, and she's like, ah.
Like, yeah, because then it's she doesn't quite get what's going on, and it just I love stuff like that because it's a well-written script, but then you get these talented and really good comedic minds together, and you can come up with jokes that are even better.
Mm-hmm.
and work better in the moment. So that I kind of I just dug that. And then like even silly stuff like and this again, Landis loves these silly moments. And there's like one of my favorites is when they switch the briefcases, and then Billy Ray gets up and he walks out and he goes to the bathroom and knocks on the door, and they're doing their secret knock. Like that's just such a silly moment, and it's so perfect. Just open the door. Delivered as only Eddie Murphy could deliver that too, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton of really like just great moments like that in the movie. Did you have a favorite kind of moment or joke or anything that struck you? Because it sounded like you enjoyed the movie, which is good.
Yeah. I definitely enjoyed the movie. I mean, there's a lot of just a lot of little stuff. I think just like the knocking, a lot of the stuff we've already kind of touched on. I don't know. It was there was just always something interesting going on. Especially I mean, probably if I was going to pick something out, it'd probably be the Santa, especially in the bus and eating through the beard thing like that. That just made me go, oh, I don't have a beard that long, but I've definitely had food come in contact with the beard. And
plus, how many like any of us that have ever drank alcohol have been probably at some point that intoxicated where you just like you're not even paying attention anymore. Like you're trying to eat on reflex. And but there's that, or when they first bring Billy Ray to the house and they're showing him around because
oh, this is mine.
yeah, because like what I love about that is Billy Ray Valentine is a very smart character. He's really on the ball. He understands what's going on. And so he doesn't trust these two guys at all.
Oh yeah.
And as he's talking to him and he's just slowly grabbing things and putting them in his pockets and like picking up the box of cigars and sticking it in his jacket. And he doesn't believe a word they're saying. And meanwhile, like Randolph is hardcore trying to convince him, no, this is all your stuff. You're just stealing from yourself. Like both the Duke brothers are. And he's just like, nah, man, this is crazy. So I love that. Or there's a couple of fourth wall breaks. I don't know.
Yeah, where it's camera.
Yeah. My favorite one is when his first day in the firm and they're explaining commodities to him. Because this is what up until this point, it's sort of Mortimer is more the dickhead of the two brothers. And then you realize, no, Randolph isn't any nicer. He just presents being a nicer person. But the way he talks down to Billy Ray, especially when he's like pork bellies, which can be made into bacon, which you may know from a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. Just Billy Ray like spiking the camera, being like, "Really? Did he just tell me that?" I love that, and that's such a John Landis kind of feel to it. I mean, again, if you've seen Blues Brothers, you've seen American Werewolf, like that was his style at that point. To really do stuff like this. I think that's why I love, because I love Blues Brothers. I love this movie. Spies Like Us is one of my favorites. I haven't watched Coming to America in a long time. And I haven't seen the sequel, Coming to America, which it's terrible naming. because they changed TO to the number 2 to denote the second
Sure.
movie, and it's like that's terrible. But I want to see it
Mhm.
because I'd love to see Eddie Murphy slipping back into that character and all of that. But there's just something with the way Landis does these jokes. Even the scene where he takes the watch to the pawn shop,
Yeah.
which, by the way, that's another cameo. It's Bo Diddley, blues musician.
Oh.
Bo Diddley was the pawn shop guy, and the what is the line? Let me find it here, where he's explaining what the watch is, and here again, this is where and I said this earlier, but Dan Aykroyd, as a comedic actor, being both kind of really stuck up and like stiff, but also can be goofy. He's one of the few people that can deliver lines the way that he does with, like, it is the sports watch of the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
Felt like such an upper crust New York version of Raymond Stantz. Like that's the cadence of that was like what Ray Stantz would say in Ghostbusters.
Right.
And where is it? Because he talks about the different countries that the here it is. This is the sports watch of the 1980s. It tells times simultaneously in Monte Carlo, Beverly Hills, London, Paris, Rome, and Stade. Which is, number one, Paris, Rome, Monte Carlo, and Stade are all in the same time zone. So it really only
Yeah.
those 4. So it's London, Beverly Hills, and then Europe. But Stade, of all places, is just such a ridiculous place to mention. and then, of course, that gets the response of, well, in Philadelphia, it's worth $50. And I love to use that line whenever somebody's trying to explain how expensive something is to me. And that's always my response, is to do just that, because it's just perfect. Like, and then for the end of that scene, oh, how much for the gun? Which, again, you could buy those in pawn shops with no problem back then. Probably still can. Who knows?
Yeah. Find the right one.
Yeah. It's hard to say if I have a favorite moment. I did think it was interesting. They shot the commodities exchange stuff at the end of the movie on the actual commodities exchange floor of the World Trade Center.
I was wondering about that because it's like this. It seemed too, I don't know, too elaborate to be a set, and so I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
wondering about that.
Apparently, they originally were going to shoot during the week, and they were going to have some professional traders along with extras. And so they were going to shoot on the floor, and they tried. They went for a day, and trading stopped because everyone was paying attention to the movie shoot and what Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy were doing. And so, like, all right, we'll come back on a weekend. And so they came back on like a Saturday and shot everything then. But just crazy. They brought capitalism to a halt with this movie for at least part of a day. But yeah, most of it was shot in Philadelphia and New York, and they would sort of double stuff for each. So there would be exteriors that would be shot in Philadelphia, but then the interiors, I think of Winthorpe's house was actually a location in New York.
Okay.
But the outside was shot in Philadelphia. And then the Duke and
happens all the
Duke, the Duke and Duke offices were in New York somewhere, which that building was crazy. I mean, talk about like just straight up rich people building. It had
especially that big room where Dan Aykroyd gets, they check each other's pockets and stuff. That big room.
Oh,
with
yeah.
all the paint walls. Like this is a legit real room because of how over the top it is. Because there's no way you could make that work.
Yeah. Oh, the men's club. Yes.
Yeah.
What was the other thing? Man, it was the sofa, like the love seat they had in the elevator.
Yeah, I saw that.
Like, you don't see that anymore. Mostly because a lot of buildings that size have like speed elevators. But to see that where they got in the elevator and sat down for the ride all the way down, like that I don't know, something about that just made me laugh a little bit. And we haven't even gotten to the monkey, the ape at the end. when they're on the train. So I just talked about this movie a few weeks ago. I was on a podcast talking about top 5 movies to kind of ring in the new year, and
Okay.
I always think of this movie as a little bit of a New Year's movie. It's weird because New Year's doesn't really play like a major plot point, but the setting on the train is on New Year's Eve.
Yeah,
And
the
so
climax.
yeah, so I sort of always think of it like that. It's kind of, it just, for me it works. But all that stuff on the train, one thing I never noticed until this watch through, the music playing in that car where the party's going on is just the same song every time. They never
Really?
they never change the
Yeah.
music for some reason. But you had like, there was another cameo, it was Al Franken and Tim, was it Davis? They were, more Saturday Night Live alumni.
Yeah.
Also, the guy that played the train, he was the one telling him about the ape, and kind of yelling at him, and like,
Okay.
he was he had been an Airplane. He was well known for being like somebody in Airplane. Tom Davis. Al Franken and Tom Davis were the baggage handlers. Don McLeod was the gorilla. Steven Stucker, the station master. And Steven Stucker he was like an air traffic controller in Airplane. Johnny
Okay.
Henshaw. And the sequel, amazingly enough. But I love the stuff, like, it's a silly bit with the gorilla. Because why would you be
Yeah.
transporting a gorilla for whatever reason? And then
And the 2 baggage handler guys are just like, I guess there's 2. Yeah, they didn't even notice that there's 2 now all of a sudden. And
no, not at all.
It's my turn to drive the tram.
Oh, that was where's his Paul Gleason played Clarence Beeks, who ends up in the gorilla costume. He knocks out Jim
Yeah.
Belushi, and then the gorilla knocks him out, and so they tape his mouth shut and put the gorilla costume on him. But Paul Gleason he was originally they wanted to cast G. Gordon Liddy, who,
Okay.
if you're not familiar with that name, he was one of the people responsible for the break-in of the Watergate Hotel during Nixon's administration.
Oh, interesting. Like, not an actor.
No, he had done that, and actually, there's a fun little Easter egg in the movie. Clarence Beeks is reading G. Gordon Liddy's book on the train.
Oh, okay.
But they end up getting Paul Gleason, and Paul Gleason's kind of perfect for that role because he's another one of those guys that he's one of those actors that can just play a jerk so well.
Yes.
And this is before he was the principal, Vernon, in Breakfast Club. So like, I kind of almost want to think like this part got him that role of Principal Vernon.
Or at
and
least, maybe had some influence on.
It
Oh,
had-
yeah, that guy was in that movie. He'd be a good fit for this.
It had to have had some influence on John Hughes to be like, yeah, we're gonna totally cast him, because Gleason's just so good at that and it's funny because he's by all accounts he's probably a really nice guy. He can come off with that look when he's on the phone, when he's calling in and the woman's just standing there waiting, and for him to just like piss off and tell her to leave, like, it's just perfect. So he definitely, you don't feel bad for him getting left in the cage with the gorilla.
Yeah, he definitely earned that fate.
What was it when the baggage handlers come wandering into the car out of nowhere, and he tells them he'll like rip off your face and or something. This is like, whoa, they went from 0 to 100 in no time. So yeah,
And then the whole thing of at the men's club when he's like, oh, everybody's we've observed a thief and we've
Mhm.
marked the bills, and the whole thing of like, if your agent has observed the thief, you know who it is.
right.
He walks straight to Dan Aykroyd, but they had this whole thing of put your hand on the shoulder. It's like, what was that? Like, that was just kind of over the top. you know.
Yeah, they really tried to overdo that. I don't, it's just silly. But the whole movie is silly, and that's what makes it work. Like it's the silly, over the top nature of everything. Because you got an actor like Don Amici playing just this horrible person, and Don Amici is just like, there's something about him. First of all, the guy was in his mid-50s for like 45 years. Like he just always looked that age. But he like, to have him and Ralph Bellamy be the villains in this movie is just fun for me, because it's so against type for them. And yeah, it's just it's one of those movies you just gotta go with. Now, here's a question for you.
Mhm.
Do you think we need more comedies like this? Because this is an R-rated comedy, but it's R-rated for some language, and that's it. It's not like a raunchy comedy. It doesn't go as far as something like The Hangover, even.
And there is some nudity.
There
because
is.
We see some boobs from a few different ladies.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that I always like to have options, right? Like, you can always have the Christmas stories, which are fun for the whole family, and then you work your way up to the raunchy stuff, and you can have tiers and levels in the middle. This is definitely one that I can't show my kids for a long time, and probably they should just watch it without me once they're old enough,
Sure.
kind of a thing. But yeah, no, I think it's capture as many people as you can. Try to capture a niche market.
And I think,
was
like, I feel like comedies like this are kind of underserved because, for one, they don't get made these days because R-rated films are a harder sell. And you lose a lot of your audience that way. Whereas when this movie came out, there was no PG-13 yet. This was still prior to that. And so you either had PG or you had R. But I think, like, with a couple of tweaks, this could easily be PG-13. You drop a few F-bombs and you don't have topless women in it, and it's PG-13.
Yeah, because really especially like the topless women, you can really cut those scenes and not lose too much of the the plot stuff. Though
Yeah.
I do think I kind of agree with Landis with the one F-bomb at the end with I'm blanking on the actor's name, but the actor who only said it once.
Yes.
I feel like I do stand with Landis. I think that was a good scene because it shows right at the very end he doesn't care about his brother, like that he's partner. I thought that was so. I think that that's your one F-bomb, that because you can have one F-bomb with a PG-13 movie, and then you try to cut out all the rest. Yeah,
I think with some creative editing of the script, you could easily but I feel like leaving it R-rated does kind of give it a little bit more of an edge that you don't get with some, like, it doesn't feel sanitized or watered down either. And I just wish that more comedies would do that, sort of be like romantic comedy, like When Harry Met Sally, which gets an R rating for some language, but it's not like it's overtly sexual. It's not violent or gross out comedy. It's just like it's R rated for some language. Even something like a kind of Kevin Smith type comedies. Clerks, for instance, doesn't have any violence in it. It's got a lot of suggestive sexual language, but like that's the only thing about it. And I just feel like those aren't movies that get as much. And obviously, you wouldn't see a movie like that being number 4 at the box office anymore because that's just not the type of movie that does it. I just feel like this was a product of the environment and the film-going environment of its time, too. And I think I feel like that's why Landis, his movies didn't translate well after the 80s. Because if you look at sort of his filmography after Coming to America in 1988, kind of, I don't want to say falls off a cliff, but there's diminishing returns. He did a lot of work, and he did some music video stuff, and he's done movies, but things like Blues Brothers 2000 just isn't the same as Blues Brothers and The Stupids or some of his TV show stuff. He transitioned more into television series and kind of doing some one-offs here and there. He did some episodes of Psych, which were great. but it sort of felt like he was perfect to have in that era of the 80s comedy. And he either needed to sort of evolve with the times, and he didn't quite, because you watch interviews with him, he's very much he understands what he likes, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But his stuff, like, this was his stride, was sort of 1980 to 1988, that 8 years where he could just, his style of comedy worked for that era.
Yeah.
So I enjoy it. I mean, Three Amigos, Spies Like Us, Trading Places, and Blues Brothers are and Coming to America. They're all phenomenal comedies, and for the most part, they hold up. There'll be moments here and there where they don't, and maybe are things that, looking back at 30, 40 years later, you would do differently through the lens of today, but in their time, they weren't that bad. I mean, this is the 80s. This is when you put C. Thomas Howell in blackface and made a movie that got released. So, like, to say the times were different is not it's not out of nowhere. Like, it was a very different time to be doing stuff. Should it have happened? Probably not, but it did.
And then to contrast that, there's also a lot of stuff that is very timeless, like the criticisms of the classism stuff and the racism stuff is still stuff we're dealing with, today, 30 plus years later.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that was, he did it in this. They had that, not to the same level, but like Blues Brothers has a little bit of that with sort of poking fun at the Illinois Nazis. And all of that. And, Spies Like Us is Cold War era, and they're poking fun at kind of both sides of that. And, but yeah, this movie having these just sort of very overt and yet not preachy about racism and social classism that I really liked, sort of helps to make it more like it's still relevant today because of that kind of stuff. So I did dig that as well. But it's a fun comedy. It's silly, and I have a great time with it, and it's endlessly quotable. There's so many good clips in this, and I captured a whole bunch. I kind of want to play a few of these because they're too good not to. We talked about the $5 Christmas bonus because the movie starts off right before Christmas, and I love that because the guy comes in to bring them. Tell me this isn't absolutely rich old white guy moment. They're reading the newspapers when the butler walks in with 2 glasses of just milk. That's it. And he goes, "Oh, I bet you think I forgot about your Christmas bonus," and hands him a $5 bill. And his reaction,
$5. Maybe I'll go to the movies by myself.
By myself. Like, that was not any money then. It'd be, and I think it's the equivalent is like $13 today or something.
Yeah, I meant to look up what the equivalent was today, but
I did look up. So when they bring Billy Ray Valentine into the car and they offer him to the house and everything and a job making $80,000 a year, so the equivalent today, adjusted for inflation, would be offering you or I just under $240,000 a year for a job. So
not too shabby.
Not bad at all. And so after he talks about going to the movies, the butler, the servant guy talks about going to the movies by himself. And then Mortimer's like, "No, remember, half of that's from me too."
Thank you, Mr. Mortimer.
And then as he says that, he turns to walk away and he's muttering to himself. Loved that. Let's see. Oh, when the costuming for Winthorpe in the middle part of the movie, where he's lost all his money and he's wearing the clothes that were left in Jamie Lee Curtis's apartment, is some of the most ridiculous stuff I've ever seen. The boots that he was wearing, these like platformed white patent leather boots. When he walks into the club wearing that with the fur jacket, he's got the fur coat on, and like everything is a different pattern in a different direction. But as he's walking in, and his former fiance, which again, like, talk about the classism part of things. As soon as he doesn't have any money, she just wants nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
The mere mention of him being a drug dealer, she wants nothing to do with him. But her new boyfriend leans down and tells her, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this." And he calls her,
I'll handle this, Pookums.
"I'll handle this, Pookums." I was like, I had to rewind it because I'd forgotten that he said that. I'm like, really? Did he just say?
I'll handle this, Pookums.
Yeah, he called her Pookums. So that was getting captured because, of course. I have this on a soundboard now, and it will be forever, which is...
In Philadelphia, it's worth $50.
Good old Bo Diddley.
Yeah, I'll have to pull that one out. And that and the $5. Anytime someone says $5, I'm like, oh, now I can go to the movies alone by myself.
When Billy Ray's in the jail cell, and there's the two guys that are giving him all sorts of crap, and the one is always talking, and the other guy just responds with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought about, he said it too many times, but I thought about getting a supercut of just, because that was his only line, was just, yeah, over and over. And trying to say it deeper every time, it felt like. So that made me laugh. When Winthorpe is in the police station, is a great scene, because there again is your classism, where he thinks he's above everything, and the police are like, and that's the interesting one to me, and that's where you have to really suspend your disbelief, right? Because it's hard for your logic brain to get around, like, this is somebody who has had money their whole life and has no record, and all of a sudden the police just believe that this guy is who is being told that he is. Meanwhile, he would have, like, somebody there would have known who Louis Winthorpe III is. So you suspend your disbelief a little bit for that, but when he's yelling about his rights, and the guy just...
Strip, you little shit, before I tell you a new asshole.
And then we just cut away from it. And it's perfect to have the little squeak of the chair, too. That's what really sells that whole moment, is the squeak of the chair, and he points at him. I only got one Denham Elliott clip, but it's such a good one. And it's when he takes the phone call from Randolph Duke. And he just takes the phone call and is told what he has to do to Winthorpe. And he's like, "Yes, very good, sir. Okay." And he hangs it up. And as he's walking away, he just...
What a scumbag.
It's like, but he goes along with it for a while. He plays along. But that was, I was like, oh, that was a term that I used a lot growing up, for people that I didn't like. So, well, we mentioned this line already, but it's such a good one because it's such a Dan Aykroyd line.
It tells time simultaneously in Monte Carlo, Beverly Hills, London, Paris, Rome, and Stad.
And Stad. He's really good at that kind of that upper crust New York, New England type of thing he's doing. And he said in an interview it was because growing up where he did in Canada, their neighbor was like that but worse. And so he's like, I just took that and sort of backed it off a little bit.
Make it believable.
Make it more believable. And then it just became the kind of character. So I love that. But Dan Aykroyd.
This is the sports watch of the 80s.
Like, tell me that's not proto Ray Stantz right there.
It's the thinnest water resistant watch ever made. Whatever it was. Yeah.
Water resistant to 3 atmospheres. Oh, and then I just love the way he said
Pork bellies.
Because and also the Harvard, was it tie? When he's walking up,
He went to Harvard.
Again, Aykroyd is like the perfect foil for Eddie Murphy. He's like,
the cast is great, and
you can see why when he was writing Ghostbusters that he originally had Eddie Murphy in mind for the character of Winston Zeddemore, because they had worked together on this, and like you can see it now. Ernie Hudson's perfect. The way it ended up working out, Hudson is perfect for that role. But you can definitely see why the two of them would want to work together again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and thinking about it, like, not to go too crazy into a whole other podcast about Ghostbusters, because the way it worked out, he's very much the straight man to these three crazy guys. If Eddie Murphy was the fourth member, he'd have to play a lot straighter than I think he typically plays his characters. So
Yeah.
I think it worked out with Ernie Hudson.
Yeah, Ernie Hudson getting to be sort of the outsider lets Aykroyd be a little goofier. And plus, the main reason that he wasn't in it was they couldn't afford him, because by the time they were starting to work on that, Beverly Hills Cop had come out and he'd blown up. And so they just couldn't get him. Got some Billy Ray Valentine, because boy, Eddie Murphy is just crushing it in this movie. So I love the scene where they bring Winthorpe back to the house, like after he's tried to off himself with the pills, and they have the doctor and they walk away, and then he's laying in the bed and he wakes up, and it's that wonderful false, like, oh, it was just a dream, and he's all sort of coming out of his sleep, and all he sees is Coleman. And then when he sees Eddie Murphy and just lunges at him and starts choking him out, and it's just,
it was the Dukes, it was the Dukes.
And one thing I wasn't expecting was the Dan Aykroyd trying to kill himself. Like, that got, I knew press, but like that got dark really fast, and they kind of moved on from it really quickly. And
they did, and that again is a Landis type of thing. Like he would kind of skirt that stuff a little bit. If you remember American Werewolf in London, it had some real darkness to it that was surprising. Given sort of, because it's both a horror and a comedy,
right?
But yeah, they don't dwell on it for very long, and it's played. It's not really played for a joke either. Him trying that, but they don't focus on it. So yeah, it was definitely something that you can forget if you don't watch the movie for a few years. Like, oh yeah, I forgot this goes dark there for a few minutes.
Yeah.
You don't have an 80s Eddie Murphy movie without the Eddie Murphy laugh. So you got... So that was him as his Cameroonian character. And then, of course, that laugh. Which, the scene where he's in the tub and he does the jacuzzi. So then...
Say, man, when I was growing up, we want jacuzzi. We had to fart in the tub.
That was another that had to have been an ad lib, 100%.
I'm sure.
When he's juggling the vase, and he kind of do a little Metal Lark Lemon, and he drops it. I just for some reason it just made me laugh the way they laughed about it. I love those forced fake laughs that you have characters do in movies.
You want me to break something else?
No.
It's that quick. No.
And even the butler was no.
Yeah. And that scene is great because he's like, no, I believe we paid $35,000 for that vase. Then we told the insurance company it was worth $50,000.
See, look, he made us.
Yeah. What's this one? I can
see.
Yeah, that's. I just love that, or I can see, and
I have legs.
And almost, I mean, there's some early versions of Donkey.
Yeah,
Like the way he would deliver that sounds like what he ended up coming up with for the donkey voice.
I can see.
Yeah, there's several points where I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely hear some donkey in here, proto donkey at least.
Yeah.
Beef jerky time.
I'm keeping that. That's just too much fun. Just offering people beef jerky. That whole character was so silly.
Yeah.
And just like offering everybody, just shoving beef jerky in their face. Just
Beef jerky time.
again, totally, it's made up on the spot. My favorite way to wish people a Happy New Year.
Merry New Year!
It's just too much fun. I think this is, I want to say this is between
I can see!
and
I have legs!
where he goes,
Oh, shit!
Just that whole scene is just too much fun. So, got to keep all those around. And then, of course,
Is there a problem, officers?
and there's another one of those mirrored moments from Blues Brothers. Because if you remember in Blues Brothers, there's that shot where they're trying to deliver the money, and then all the police point the guns at him at the same time, and they do the same thing here when he comes out from under the table. So Landis doing thing, and finally I got a couple of the Dukes because, so you heard it at the beginning, which is Randolph Duke.
Wrong.
And
Untrue.
And I'm keeping those because you just have to. I need sound drops when I'm playing a game or something, and people do something dumb, and I'm just like
wrong.
But you also have, I love this exchange between the two of them, and this sets up that moment at the end, with where he drops the F-bomb.
Money isn't everything, Mortimer.
Oh, grow up.
That, and then there was another one, I didn't capture it, but where he says, Mother always said you were greedy. And he's like, she meant it as a compliment. And then it's just Don Ameche. Now, okay. Not only is Don Ameche probably one of the nicer people out there, and he definitely doesn't come off as a villain, but he had the voice, like velvety smooth voice, and just the way, like, these are terrible lines, but just
Probably been stealing since he could crawl.
like just how smooth his voice is.
Yeah.
When they roll up in the Rolls Royce and they're trying to get Billy Ray inside, and he just holds up the bottle and says,
Whiskey.
Or when they're looking over the checks and you get the Clarence Beeks, and he's sort of like, and it's just trying to cover that up, like with
and for that scene, I thought that because it happens the first time with Dan Aykroyd bringing out the checks, and they're like, oh no, sweep that into the road, or I'll take care of that myself.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, they're like, that's like an embezzling thing, like that check is to themselves kind of thing. And it turned out not to be that, but I thought, oh, that'd be really cool if they were doing that.
Yeah. And capturing those fake coughs, like the, no more talk, like that, and fake laughs are my favorite. So you get your, and then also, and finally, and this was another one, again, Mortimer is all about, no, it's the nature of people. Like, you take Winthorpe and put him anywhere and he'll be fine. And when he compares them to horse racing, it's like breeding racehorses.
It's in the blood.
And again, just that
voice. Yeah.
Man, just so good.
Probably been stealing since he could crawl.
I want a voice like that. And I get complimented on my voice every once in a while. I got nothing on Don Ameche. Like, that voice is buttery smooth. But this movie is, it's weird for it to be the fourth highest grossing film of an entire year of the 80s. I do feel like it's kind of underseen by people today.
Oh, definitely.
Because I definitely know quite a few people that are similar to you, where they sort of like knew it maybe existed but never saw it, or a lot of people don't even know about it. They're just like, what's Trading Places? Like, how do you, Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, how do you not know this one? But it didn't have, it's funny because it was only, a year later that Ghostbusters comes out, and Beverly Hills Cop, and those are, like, everybody remembers those movies. But for some reason, 1 year earlier, and just nobody remembers Trading Places. And it's kind of a bummer because I do think that it's one of the better comedies of the 80s. So I'm really glad you got to watch it. And it was you mentioned did I mention it to you, or did you mention that you hadn't seen it? Somehow it came up, but I'm glad that it did, because
I think in our conversation we were looking at, like, I brought throughout, like, oh, if we're trying to be timely, like I was trying to think of some New Year's movies.
okay,
I think you threw out.
that could be it. Yeah, because I definitely do think of this as a New Year's movie, and I do. It tends to be one that I watch right around this time of year because of that. It's sort of, I'm reminded, like, oh, that's right. You know, Trading Places, the end of the movie's on New Year's on the train, and then I want to watch it, and I laugh I laugh out loud. Okay, I have a favorite moment. I'm sorry. Now I remember it. And it is when, after the scene where Winthorpe plants all the drugs on Valentine in his office, and they have the whole thing where he runs out and he leaves, and Valentine is taking the drugs out of there and throwing them out, but he grabs the joint and he sticks it in his pocket and he gets rid of everything else. Then he decides he's going to go smoke that in the bathroom. So he's sitting on the toilet, he lights it up, and immediately he's like looking around, and he stands up on the toilet to blow it through the air vent when the Dukes walk in. So he's hiding. The moment where he takes it and he's like, I got to hide this, and he just stuffs the lit joint in his mouth, and then immediately he's like, oh, what a... It's such a perfect reaction, and I laugh out loud so hard at that.
I wonder if that was ad-libbed.
It had to have been. It's too good not to. Like,
I thought that him dropping the joint, like he disposing of the drugs and then dropping the joint in his pocket. I was like, oh, that was probably an ad lib, but then it became a plot point.
Yeah,
yeah. I think the popping in his mouth.
it's just because they show the immediate reaction. They cut away and they come back and he's still reacting to it, and like it's burning the inside of his mouth, and that just cracks me up so much. I could not help but laugh. It's like that, and the open the door, like, because it's such a silly moment and it's such a great setup and then payoff. And those are some of my favorite moments in the movie.
I did like, I can't repeat it word for word because I'll butcher it, but Dan Aykroyd, he's gotten caught. The Dukes walk in, so it's the four of them with Eddie Murphy, and he's like, "Look, I caught him. He's got he's like naming off all the things, and he's but it was like the most, I've never done drugs in my life, but I have to name things,
Yes, that was good. Or
pills and blue pill, or whatever.
Or the running thing where when Penelope comes to the police station to pick him up, and she says, and you were caught with heroin. He's like, it wasn't heroin, it was PCP, angel dust. And then he keeps saying that to everybody. And it's like, if you don't know about the drugs at all, why do you keep correcting them? It's so good. It's and again, that's like that out of touch. He doesn't understand anything. So yeah, that stuff is great. This movie is just fun. I definitely, it's not one I think that's on any streaming services at the moment. I don't know. Did you have to rent it or anything?
Yeah, I did. I think it was like $3 on YouTube or something.
I mean, it's a fairly inexpensive rental, and it's probably going to cycle its way through Hulu or HBO or somebody at some point. But it's worth seeking out. It's worth a $3 or $4 rental for sure.
Oh yeah, I definitely felt like it was worth it.
And for me, it's one of my favorite Dan Aykroyd movies. Like this, Ghostbusters. When I think of Dan Aykroyd, that's what I think of. Blues Brothers, Trading Places, Spies Like Us, like those 80s comedies, Ghostbusters. I just love that. And it might be my favorite Eddie Murphy too. It's hard to say because like sort of the same thing, like Coming to America, Beverly Hills Cop, The Golden Child, this movie, 48 Hours. But there's something when I read or saw the interview with him saying that like he hasn't had fun on a movie set like he has since Trading Places, I believe it, because there's just something about his performance and the energy that he has with it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, this is. Go ahead.
Have you ever seen Gross Point Blank? It's 90s, but
yes.
Dan Aykroyd. It's not a huge part, but he plays a significant part. That's another small Dan Aykroyd movie that I always think about whenever I think about Dan Aykroyd.
Yes. I love him as Grocer in Gross Point Blank. He's amazing in that. You're right. Sneakers is another one he's really good in.
I need to watch that again. It's been too long.
I just like the first things for me that pop into my head are those 80s ones. But yeah, he was, I mean, he's still
Prime Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, this is just a fun movie. Definitely, you should check it out if you haven't yet. If you're listening to the show and you haven't, well, it's a comedy. There's not really much to spoil, so just enjoy it. It's worth it. You're still, even us telling you the jokes and hearing clips from it, you're still gonna laugh at these moments. Just be prepared for Dan Aykroyd in blackface as a Rastafarian, because that's ridiculous. But it's brief. But outside of that, I think it's definitely worth watching. It's a funny movie. With, the stakes are low, like the ridiculousness of they're trying to corner the frozen orange juice concentrate market. I almost forgot. This movie actually is responsible for a law in commodities trading.
I saw that on Wikipedia. Yeah.
Yeah, the Eddie Murphy rule is what they call it. But it basically is to stop firms from using insider information. They can't do that because of this movie, basically, which I think is hilarious that a silly 80s comedy did that. Like almost 30 years later, it finally was enacted, but they called it the Eddie Murphy rule. And just the idea of like, we're going to corner the market on frozen orange juice concentrate. And then they lost whatever it was, $324 million, and just lost everything. So definitely worth it. Tyler, thank you so much for being here, because it's been a little while since you've been on. Always a pleasure to have you around. What are you working on now? What do you got going on?
So in terms of stuff that people can check out, because I have a day job that nobody can don't visit me in my day job.
No.
But I do a podcast with my best friend. He is a former music teacher. I just enjoy the story of an artist, the progression through an artist's career. So we have a podcast called The Discographers, and basically we will pick an artist and work our way through. We'll start the first album that they release and work our way through their whole discography. And my buddy breaks down the music theory stuff. I kind of tell the history, and it's just it's basically an excuse for the two of us to hang out, because he lives in Colorado and I live in California now. But we are right at the tail end of our Linkin Park series. We had to take some breaks just with life and post COVID, trying to getting back into our work stuff, and work just being too crazy. We're both managers, so we're picking up slack everywhere. But we're finally getting into wrapping up our Linkin Park series. We actually just dropped an episode today on the Linkin Park album, The Hunting Party.
Okay.
And it's we're just having fun doing that. So if you want to check us out, and you don't know how to spell The Discographers, because it's a made up word that is really long, if you go to discogpod.com, that's our website, and you can check us out. And we're on all the podcatchers, and it's just a fun time.
Excellent. I love the idea of going through an artist's or a band's entire catalog and looking at all of it, and that
the bad with good.
Yeah, and
a lot of
the
there's
look.
There's so many albums that are because we did the Smashing Pumpkins, and there's that era, there's the prime era of Smashing Pumpkins, and then there's the not so well known Smashing Pumpkins, like 2000s and stuff.
Yep.
And we kind of go into it with a fresh eyes, and go, hey, no, there's actually some really good music in here, and here's what they're trying to do. Maybe they didn't necessarily achieve their plan, but this is what they're so it's a lot of fun, and you get to really sit down with some music that maybe you kind of dismissed.
Absolutely.
Offhand.
Yeah, I love the idea of doing that, and I like having somebody who's got kind of a music theory and structure and sort of that background versus maybe not the same musical background, but an appreciation for it. So you're gonna listen to and view things differently than he does, and vice versa, and I like that too. Yeah,
And
Smashing Pumpkins is a great choice.
Yeah, that was definitely a fun season. And we always try to approach whatever we're always trying to find the good in something. Like we
Uh-huh.
will point out, like, oh yeah, maybe that didn't land or something, but we definitely try to go trying to find the best parts of an artist and not just criticize, because there's too many people out there who just like, oh, this was bad because it's bad, and
Right. Like,
it's lame.
and I appreciate that as somebody who does the same thing with film. Like, I'm always looking for the good things in film. It takes a lot for me to really write something off. Like, it's got to be, M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender was one that I just couldn't find anything. I wanted to find something worthwhile in it, but it just didn't do it. And that'll happen sometimes, but for as bad as Metallica's Saint Anger album is, there's got to be something worthwhile in there, because they've been around for too long.
Yeah.
So I love that, and definitely Discographers is a cool show, and I love the idea of doing it. So very, very cool. Check that out, discogpod.com. Or Discographers or Discographers, if you want to phoneticize it. You can do that. Excellent. So this show I record Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and I put it out as a podcast on Wednesdays. You can get it anywhere you get your podcasts, or you can go to tvstravis.com, because I gave it a name with punctuation and all sorts of terrible SEO. My SEO is terrible with the title for the show. But wait, you haven't seen. There is an update to tvstravis.com in the works, so keep an eye out for that too. It's going to look a little nicer here pretty soon. And also, if you want to support this show in a financial sense, you can do that at Patreon, patreon.com/WYHS, for as little as $1 an episode. Or if supporting the show is you just listening to it, I appreciate that. Any way that you support the show, I appreciate it, and I wouldn't do it without people that enjoy listening. That's a lie. I probably would do it, but not for 200 episodes, which is what's coming up next week, is episode number 200, and I can't believe I've done that many. And if you've been here for all of those, or even just this one, I appreciate it, and thank you. So that's what's coming up next week. Keep an eye out on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. I'll be talking about what movie I'll be watching and who will be my guest for big episode number 200, and then I've got some fun stuff coming down the pipeline as well. So until then, Tyler, thank you so much for being here this week.
Thank you for having me, and good luck with the big 200.
Oh, thanks. And as always, this time of year,
Merry New Year!
because that is when we're recording, is on New Year's Day. So until next week, big number 200 and everything else going on, be excellent to each other. This has been Wait, You Haven't Seen.
Get the fuck out!
Oh, I couldn't not use that for the end of it.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect.
Such a good record scratch, needle drop moment. Faye, you're right. It doesn't feel like it's been that long. The funny thing is, it's been 200 episodes in under 4 years, because I haven't missed a week since I started doing this in March of 2019. I have a problem, is what it is. It's and it reached a point where I'm like, well, now I have to see just how long I can go.
Right. Yeah. Now you can't straight.
Yeah, and now it's going to get tricky because the pandemic hit and I couldn't go anywhere, so it was pretty easy. But now in the coming months, I have 2 different trips scheduled.
I was gonna say, take like a vacation at some point.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be going to Adepticon in Chicago at the end of March, which is a Warhammer convention. And then I'm going to be in Vegas at the end of April for TMS Vegas. So I'm going to be having to figure out scheduling to get stuff that's able to release those weeks anyway, because those will be. But I'm finally going to get some vacation.
It still counts if you bank it. It's okay.
Absolutely. It's all about release schedule. But yeah, 200 episodes in 201 weeks. Technically, I had 1 week where I couldn't put out the full episode because the audio was just junk. It was terrible. Just do it live from there. I've thought about doing a live recording Wait You Haven't Seen when I'm in Vegas with somebody, if there's anybody from the Frog Pants community that's going to be in that night, that Sunday, because I'll be in Vegas on that Sunday. So we'll see. Yes, Ace, you are always available. This is true. And I'm sure that that'll happen, because I'm going to have to, at some point, I'm going to have to bank a couple episodes anyway, no matter what. But that's the problem, is I didn't set this show up for seasons. Like, you're smart with discographers where you're like, you know how many episodes you're doing. Like, it's Linkin Park. They got 8 albums. There we go. Or however many. I don't know how many they have.
Yeah. Well, we actually, it was funny because off the top of my head, I think it's 8 episodes, but or no, there's whatever. However many episodes, and then there's the question, because like, oh, does Linkin Park come back after Chester Bennington's passing away? You know,
right.
Maybe we'll throw it on another episode. But we ended up actually going. We recorded the episode for One More Light, which is the most, the last Linkin Park album that's come out.
Mm-hmm.
And but we was like, you know what, Mike Shinoda put out an album called Post Traumatic, and it really deals with a lot of the aftermath of Chester passing away. I think we need to include this in our series. So we actually, we tacked on 1 episode there. Yeah, for the most part, we're kind of just like, we know when we're stopping. We can kind of, we can plan for, 8 or 9 or 5 or 6, whatever the number is.
Just whatever you do, may I suggest, don't do a discographers on Buckethead.
Okay.
The only reason I say that is in 2014 alone, he put out 59 EPs.
Yeah, that might. That's I'd have to listen to them and stuff, but like that's the kind of thing that'd be like, yeah, look, we're just gonna do 1 or 2 episodes on these this run of EPs. Or
it just cracks me up that like he basically just locked himself in the studio and was like, I'm putting out an EP, more than an EP a week.
That's crazy. Like Jonathan Colton doing a thing a week for a span was I feel like a lot, but an EP, more than an EP a week, that's crazy.
Well, Buckethead's a little nuts, so he's an interesting cat. But I will say I kind of hope that Linkin Park doesn't try to continue on without Chester. Although we've seen it's weird, because the initial reaction is there's no way you can continue Linkin Park without Chester Benningfield, right? Or Bennington.
Yeah, because like there's no. I don't know. There's some bands where you go, okay, well, you get a different singer and you can do an approximation of whoever that was. But like Chester Bennington is just so unique that, there's no one person that you can just slot in and replace him.
And, like the exception to the rule is AC/DC, right? Because Bon Scott was so singular, and they both didn't change their sound and changed their sound when they brought in Brian Johnson. Like, he's not Bon Scott, and he's not really trying to be Bon Scott. Yeah. But somehow they could just keep doing the same music with him, and it worked. And like, that's not something that just anybody can do.
Yeah. And on the other hand, with the whole Chester Bennington thing with Linkin Park, like if the band tries to do stuff without Chester, which I think the band is completely, Mike Shinoda, we've kind of found through this series that Mike Shinoda is the heart and soul of Linkin Park.
Mm-hmm.
He is the main creative force behind the band. He could totally continue Linkin Park on without Chester, but now it's not Linkin Park anymore. Now, so
yeah,
it's tough no matter what you do, and I don't blame them for not kind of I from what I've heard, they've tried to get back together and tried to do things to just see like feel things out. But yeah, I totally respect like just yeah, maybe we don't do anything like if it's not the perfect, if
Yeah,
if it
and
doesn't just click, then it's not a good idea.
even look at like what Audioslave was coming out of Rage Against the Machine, where it's Brad Wilk, Tim Comerford, and Tom Morello, but they get a different vocalist who's not Zach De La Rocha at all, and they don't try to recreate Rage Against the Machine. They're smart enough and they're comfortable enough with each other to know like no, we can keep that same kind of energy, but let's move it in a new direction. And they bring in Cornell, who's so different but fits in with them so well. And Audioslave is such a different animal from Rage, and it's still so well done. So like that's the kind of thing you almost want to see Shinoda and those guys do, is try to spin it in a new direction. Like keep the same energy, but don't try to recreate what Linkin Park was, because so much of what that was that perfect mixture.
Yeah.
It's like Harrison or McCartney or anybody. They weren't trying to recreate the Beatles afterwards, because you just can't. You can't recreate that thing. And I think too many times like it's tough, but the ones that work are where they don't try to, like Journey sort of did, because they replaced what's his name with a singer who sounded exactly like him, and they just kind of kept doing what they were doing. But like even what was it, Alice in Chains, after Lane Staley died, they brought in somebody who isn't Lane Staley, and you're just not going to have Lane Staley, but they found somebody else who can be a front man and have a good chemistry with them that they can continue on. But it's hard to do.
Yeah, and then do they go the Queen route where they just have some guest singers and they keep just doing old Linkin Park stuff over, and they're just that's their show now? Is the Chester Bennington tribute show? Like,
I mean,
I
and
think that
I don't think they're old enough for that yet. Like
right.
Queen can do that because they at that point they have nothing left to prove. And they can do that and still honor their friend and have a career touring. But I don't feel like Linkin Park is at that stage in their careers where that would be something that they would want. Like I can't see Shinoda doing that. That doesn't feel like the type of thing he would do. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. It's a lot of interesting thought experiments to go on with. It's like Smashing Pumpkins continuing on, because Smashing Pumpkins, was it?
I mean, at this point, they've done, because now we did a whole series on Smashing Pumpkins, and now the names are all in the past. But they were the foursome, and then they broke up completely, and then Billy Corgan and the drummer got back together.
Yeah,
and then he left for a minute, like one album, and then he came back, and then James Iha's back in, but now the drummer's, as of right now, the drummer's out, but it's still James.
Jimmy Chamberlain is gone, but James Iha's still there. Darcy is just disappeared
or something, yeah.
And she probably wants nothing to do with any of it anymore, which for me personally, because of when I grew up listening to Smashing Pumpkins, it was like once that first breakup happened, it was so hard to come back to it because I had such a strong tie in such a formative time in my life to the sound of the foursome and what they put out. And it's like, it's so different to listen to. It's sort of not the same, but it's like people that make the Van Halen comparisons where it's David Lee Roth versus Sammy Hagar. Like both bands were great. Both iterations of Van Halen were really good. They were just very different. And like Smashing Pumpkins, especially after Darcy left, changed a lot. And Billy Corgan really, he's always kind of trying to evolve and change his sound. And I think too, some of it, you might have talked about this, where they were pretty early in like a lot of digital recording.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine who was like a real, he really dove into a lot of music and stuff. not liking that at first. Like he didn't like that first album. Was it? I don't think it was Adore. I want to say it was the one after that.
Because I know Zeitgeist, which was their when Chamberlain and that was the return of the Smashing Pumpkins, even though it was 2 out of the 4.
Mm-hmm.
They made a big deal about, oh, these are all the tape machines that we did with back in Siamese Dream and stuff. So I don't. So yeah, they might have done Adore, might have dipped some toes into a digital with Adore.
Okay.
But then they're like, analog with Zeitgeist, and then I think they've kind of backed off on that. It's kind of hard where they don't really talk about a lot of that stuff unless they're really pushing for. Oh yeah, we're doing analog.
Mm-hmm.
We're making a big deal.
There is a pretty cool. Have you you ever watched or seen Rick Beato on YouTube? He's he is a musician. He was in a band for a while. He's been a producer and I think an engineer too. But he'll do these really great breakdowns where he had a series for a long time he was doing where it was what makes this song great. And he'll go through like as a producer and sort of break down like why certain aspects of a song, what helped to make it a good song. But he's also been posting a lot of interviews lately. He had an interview with he had a really great interview with Billy Corgan. He had one with I think 2 or 3 of the surviving members of Soundgarden. I think it was Kim Thale and maybe the drummer and someone else. Just and like interviewing these guys. And he was a producer. He did a lot of production in Atlanta, I think is where he is. You should check it out. I think you might kind of dig what he's got going on. It gets very like a lot of it. There's times where he's talking about chord progressions and the way that stuff is, and it just flies over my head. I'm like, okay, I understand what you're trying to tell me, but the word, you're speaking Greek, like you're speaking Klingon, but at the same time, like I get it. One of the things he talked about, and it was a music production thing I never really consciously thought of before, but it's that moment in like, say the pre-chorus where everything will sort of crescendo and then it'll all drop for a second and then the chorus will hit. And he was talking about that in one of those what makes this song great. And it was that thing where I'm like, he just put in words the thing that I feel every time I hear that in a song, but I've never consciously thought about it. And now I can't not hear it. Right. Now, like, I notice that in songs. I'm like, yeah, no, that's perfect right there where it punches. So you should check him out, Rick Beato. He also rails against YouTube a lot because so much of his stuff gets taken down. Because it's music. And he'll play like...
We've tried to put our episodes up on YouTube, and just the copyright. It's funny how like some stuff, like Nine Inch Nails. I think when we did that, like we had like 2 or 3 episodes where everything was great. Everything we referenced was fine on YouTube, and then all of a sudden there's like one episode which is this whole album, which just kept getting flagged, and it was just weird.
It happens with movie reviews too. Movies with Mikey, he's had to resort to doing things like playing video clips in reverse and reversing the frames and all of that to like try to get around the automated, even though it's all fair use and none of it should get taken down or demonetized, but whatever. That's a conversation for a whole different time. Well, Tyler, thanks so much, man.
Thank you. It's always fun. Yeah. Anytime.
And I could sit and
somebody pops out or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I could sit and chat hours about movies and music with you. So you wrapped up Linkin Park, or you wrapping up?
Recorded the episode. There's a lot of production that goes into our stuff, and one of our problems is that we this hunting party episode that we just dropped today, which is the second or third to last in this series. It's 3 hours long, so we dropped massive things, and we're actually going to for the next series we're going to change up our because instead of trying to do one big episode a month, we're going to split it out to like 3 episodes a month.
It's probably a good idea.
Just break up our segments and stuff. So it's a huge pain, but yeah, we've recorded the next episode that's going to come out. Everything goes on track. I think we were looking at beginning of February to release that one. but there's still a lot of work. We've done the recording. I have not sat down and done any of the editing on it.
Gotcha.
So,
who are you looking at doing after Linkin Park?
so we know what we're doing, and we always wait to tell announce the next series
Okay.
until the final episode of a series. So
Gotcha.
we know what we're doing. And it's a much shorter. I think we counted it out, and we're going to do. It's a 5 for us. It'll be a 5-episode run.
Okay.
Assuming they don't put out something new, because they did break up and they've played some shows live together, but haven't really talked about an album or anything. So
Okay.
those are the hints I give. But yeah, we're hoping beginning of April. Like, basically, there's some. We have a wacky plan that we want to put out, like an April Fool's Day episode, and that'll
Nice.
kick off our series
Love
tied
it.
into the next band. So we'll see how that goes, but that's our plan.
Cool. Well, I'll be waiting for that, and yeah, definitely we'll have to do this again. We can't go like a year between them, for sure. But yeah, thanks for hanging out tonight. This was fun, and it'll go out Wednesday. So I'll tag you and stuff out like that, and we'll see what goes. Oh, Faith thinks she knows who it is.
Oh,
yeah. Well, I guess you'll just have to wait and find out.
Yeah, it'll be like a whole another month, but yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, Tyler, and you have a great
anytime.
night.
You too. See
All
ya.
right, bye. Oh, and thank you, wonderful people, for being here in the chat. Faye, Ace, I saw Bombats in there earlier. Amy, you guys are great. New episode of Those Were the Days tomorrow night. We're kicking off cooking shows with Iron Chef. I can't wait. Can't wait. It's going to be tons of fun. So definitely check that out. Let's Watch Highlander still another week away before we start season 6. We'll be back on the 10th for that. So I'm going to be doing something Tuesday night. I don't know what yet. Whether it'll be more gaming, finish up Monkey Island, or I got some painting I need to get started on too. So we'll see. But until then, thanks for hanging out. You guys are wonderful. Love you all, and we'll see you soon. Okay? All right. Bye.